Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues now. And make sure to stay tuned to catch me, Mike Gallagher, coming up at 9, only on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning, Kristen McQuarrie from the Trib Ed Board, as you heard Mike Scott mention. And we're talking about Steve Bannon's interview by Charlie Rose on 60 Minutes last night. And it was actually quite revealing. It's one of the few interviews where you actually learn something about the inner workings of somebody who was part of the inner workings, because Bannon is so unabashed about how things went down, at least from his perspective, and what he believes and what the president should do, what our national policy on a range of issues should be. Kristen, I got a tweet from a guy, Dr. Roosevelt, who's a sharp guy who follows me on Twitter, because that's what people do.
That's what smart people do.
Yeah. So if you're a sharp person, you can follow me at Twitter at Dan Proft. If you're not, you can't. So
then you follow State House Chick.
Exactly.
I'll take your leftovers.
Okay, very nice. A home for everyone. And his tweet, I must say, I think Bannon earned Trump some voters for 2020, and I think it's a good way to put it. Bannon messages Trump better than Trump.
He does. I mean, during the interview several times when Charlie Rose would ask about this tweet or this reaction, Steve Bannon would say, well, this is what Trump was trying to say. Well, this was actually what he meant. And he did a better job of trying to explain some of the more bizarre things that Trump has done than Trump at explaining.
He also does a better job of elucidating what economic nationalism means in practice, in a way that's accessible, how he explained it, and also what Trump is up against when the phrase "drain the swamp" is bandied about. Listen to Bannon on draining the swamp and exactly what the swamp is.
Now that you're out of the White House, you go into war with them.
Absolutely.
Have you cleaned the swamp?
Well, first off, okay, the swamp is 50 years in the making. Let's talk about the swamp. The swamp is a business model. It's a successful business model. It's a donor, consultant, K Street lobbyist, politician. 7 of the 9 biggest, most wealthiest counties in America ring Washington, D.C.
What are you talking about when you talk about the swamp? You're talking about the lobbyists and the people.
The permanent political class is represented by both parties. You're not going to drain that in 8 months. You're not going to drain it in 2 terms. This is going to take 10, 15, 20 years of relentlessly going after it.
Hey, State House Chick, does his description of the swamp remind you of anything?
I mean, the idea that people aren't aware that our federal government and especially our state government, that there is a business model, that people make money off of all the dysfunction. And it took me a while to figure that out, too, to be honest. Like, I used to follow casino legislation in Springfield. Every year, this big Christmas tree bill would show up, and there would be 10 new casinos and slots at the racetracks and all these different things, and it would eventually collapse. And it would come up the next year. Well, why do you think it never gets passed? Because hundreds of people, lobbyists, casino companies, they make money off of the lobbying and the conversation, and they go into rooms and their clients think that they're actually getting stuff done, and they're not. And that is exactly what happens in Washington. And I think that's what he is describing, that there is a cottage industry of an entire business model around government. It's not policy driven.
And just the casino example, too, just to play that out. You also have, once you had casinos authorized, the riverboats authorized 30 years ago, right? So now when those big new casino expansion bills come up, and I'm not suggesting I'm an advocate, but I'm just describing this as a good example of the politics of it and how it works. One of the ways they get tubed is by people who are already under the tent. Mm-hmm. Right. The existing casino operators don't want competition. So the effort is met by the response, and people take the VIG, to stick with the gambling analogy, are the lobbyists and the politicians through campaign cash, right?
Oh,
That's part of the business model
the
as well. Knowing it's not going to go anywhere,
yes.
But you play this out because there's all kinds of vested interests, mostly who control the levers of power, that stand to benefit from nothing happening.
Right, exactly. You have the racetrack owners who want slots at the tracks fighting with the casino owners. And I can't think of another example, maybe the insurance industry, where you have as many lobbyists, consultants, all around the rail when bills like this come up. And you may have noticed even in the past, I would say 3 years, we as news organizations don't even cover those bills anymore because we know it's a waste of time to sit there and study and read the ins and outs of every casino bill that pops up. They're hundreds of pages because they never go anywhere. There is a, like you're saying, a vested interest in the status quo.
It'd be the same thing for other issues that have a broader audience that actually could improve the quality of life in Illinois for regular families, like, I don't know, rethinking how we do property taxes. This is what we're talking about with casinos can be applied to almost every issue category where there's money to be made. Obviously, there's lots of money to be made, starting at the House Speaker level from the property taxation, confiscatory as it is, the way it is. And so Bannon went on to talk about this fundamental decision that was made by the Trump administration at the outset. Fundamental decision after he was elected as he's trying to put together a team to govern. And he calls it, on one hand, the original sin, but on the other hand, he explains why he understands why the decision was made.
In the 48 hours after we won, there's a fundamental decision that was made. You might call it the original sin of the administration. We embraced the establishment. We totally embraced the establishment. I think in President Trump's mind, or President-elect Trump's mind, and in Jarrett's mind, and the family's mind, I actually agreed with the decision. Because you had to stand for government. And to be brutally frank, the campaign, look, I'd never been in a campaign in my entire life, right? I'm a former investment banker as a media guy, running a little website. Our whole campaign was a little bit the island of misfit toys. So he looks around, and I'm wearing my combat jacket, I haven't shaved, I got, my hair's down to here. And he says, he's thinking, hey, I've got to put together a government. I got to really staff out something. I need to embrace the establishment.
I need to govern.
I need to govern.
So it's interesting. I think that's a thoughtful response to say, on the one hand, I don't want to embrace a lot of these people. On the other hand, we've got to, this is such a huge thing to get your arms around, a little bit of the dog who caught the car, that we've got to embrace people that know the mechanics of government, at least in part. Then you get down to, should we embrace this person or that person? How much should we embrace them? The matters of degree. But at least in the early stages, you can understand why Bannon was conflicted, but understood at least at part what the Trump team decided to do, particularly given Bannon confirming what kind of most of us thought about the Trump campaign team.
Right. I've seen that look on you, by the way, unshaven hair down to here during a campaign.
Correct.
At some point. It happens.
Well, unlike Bannon, I've been on a lot of campaigns.
Yeah.
In Illinois, it's even more brutal than I think at the federal level, generally speaking.
And think about all the cabinet positions that had to be filled, just all the rank and file positions that had to be filled.
By the way, many of which, and this is a problem, so to Bannon's point, this is a real problem because personnel is policy. Many of those positions, those senior level presidential appointed positions, are still unfilled.
Yeah.
9 months in. The undersecretaries, the deputy secretaries, and I'm not a proponent of layers of bureaucracy, obviously. But there are senior level positions at massive agencies that need to be filled if you're going to reform them from within, if you're going to defang the administrative state. You can't just allow all the careerists that have been there to wait Trump out. And so that means you need your personnel in, and that still is something that plagues this administration.
It does. I don't blame them either for, I think he gets into it a little bit more with Obamacare, and there are times, and I'm torn on this, he does need Paul Ryan. I know Mitch, he does need him. He can't get his agenda through unless he has some cooperation, and he's on the brink now of, by working with Democrats and shunning them, of perhaps not, what's he going to do? Run for 2 more years, 3 more years on, blaming Congress like Obama did for 8 years? I don't know.
Paul Ryan was at the Notre Dame game that I was at.
He was?
Yeah.
Did you see him?
Yeah, I saw him. We were at the same reception because we're both big Power players.
Oh, you were at a reception that Paul Ryan was at?
That's the difference, right? Where I go, a tailgate is called a reception.
Okay.
So you understand that.
All right.
The hoi polloi is tailgating.
I see.
I'm at a refined reception.
Mm-hmm.
No, but he was there with his family at this one tailgating area.
Was it a fundraiser?
No, it wasn't a fundraiser.
Okay.
No.
How did you get in?
It's through. He was there because his brother went to Notre Dame, so I think he attends like one game a year with his brother.
Okay.
And then this is where it was ACE, the Catholic education program that's run at Notre Dame to train Catholic teachers and principals to deploy them to, K through 12 school systems and whatnot. It's a great program. So I didn't get to ask him because he was kind of triangulated by Secret Service, and he was with his family, so you don't want to cost the guy. But it was interesting you mentioned him because, at the outset you think, there's this antagonism between Bannon and the insurgents and Paul Ryan and McConnell. Well, there was a willingness to let them do what they said they can do, what they said they know, right? Here's what we want to do. Here's what you can do. This was the meeting between President Trump and legislative leaders. And here's Steve Bannon's recollection of it.
The plan was to do Obamacare because, remember, Paul Ryan and these guys come in and said, we've done this for 7 years. We've voted on this 50 times. We understand this issue better than anybody. We know how to repeal and we know how to replace, and this is ours. That's what we're going to start with day one, and we will have something on your desk by Easter. By the Easter break, we'll do repeal and replace. Come back from Easter and all the way up to the August break, taxes. Come back from the summer break on Labor Day, and we drive home to the end of the year on infrastructure. We accomplish all 3 big legislative goals in the first year. They would take...
This is what the leadership in the House and Senate told you.
And we agreed to... That was the deal.
So you're now blaming them for all of this?
I'm not blaming this for all this. What I'm saying is that when left to even repeal it, in June, when in the Senate, they put up for a vote, they only had 41 votes. There is wide discrepancy in the Republican Party, as we know today, now that we're in it. But I will tell you, leadership didn't know that at the time. They didn't know it to the very end.
Right. So if you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know how weak their caucuses were, particularly in the Senate, which I think you had to have some indication. You knew the Susan Collinses and Lisa Murkowskis of the world were going to be a trouble. You didn't necessarily know the extent. But now the question is, there was a willingness to work with them. There was a willingness to cede turf to the legislative leaders. This is your core competency. Go to it. Well, we're now in September, and none of those things that they said would happen one after the other have happened, have they? And so what do you do about it is the question. And if Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are going to essentially cede to the Democrats on these issues, then they're going to have a political enemy in Steve Bannon.
Well, and Trump. I mean,
yes.
I do think on this particular issue, voters understand that Congress dropped the ball on these 2 issues, Obamacare and tax reform. There's only so much President Trump can do. All of these members of Congress have been running for 7 years on repealing Obamacare. I do think rank and file voters understand that, and Congress will wear the jacket for that more so than President Trump. But still, going forward, the more he works around them, does he risk not getting any part of his agenda passed? And with the particular Trump voter, this is why they sent him to Washington. They are not going to put up with someone else blaming Congress, saying I tried, going via executive order to get things done. I mean, those were all the things they got so frustrated with Obama. So I'm not sure which way Trump can go.
Well, you're right. But I think he can kind of stay the course and chasten them with that debt ceiling deal he did with Chuck and Nancy.
Chucky.
But Steve
Chancey.
Bannon.
Chancey. We're putting there.
Chancey.
It's like
It's a
Brangelina.
mashup. Yeah. But Steve Bannon on the outside, and this was one of the points he made too, can do things that Steve Bannon on the inside couldn't do. Can be an outside accountability mechanism that whips up the base to provide pressure on caucus members in the House and to some extent in the Senate, and that pressures leadership. And I think that's a fair point that he makes.